Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the 200-year-old story of a creature so groundbreaking it actually helped scientists invent the very idea of dinosaurs. Let's talk about the Iguanodon.
So let's start with this puzzle. How do you even begin to describe a dinosaur when the word dinosaur doesn't even exist yet? To get our heads around this, we've got to go back in time, to an era when these giant, mysterious bones were popping up in the English countryside and nobody had a clue what they were. Okay, so our story kicks off not with some giant roaring monster, but with something, well, a lot smaller. We're talking about a handful of strange-looking teeth found back in 1822 by a husband and wife team of amateur fossil hunters, Gideon and Marianne Mantell.
Now, you got to put yourself in their shoes. The top scientists at the Royal Society had literally never seen anything like these teeth. They had no frame of reference, so they just brushed them off, saying, they're probably from a fish, or maybe a rhinoceros.
And check this out. This timeline really shows you how ahead of the curve this discovery was. The Iguanodon teeth were found years before the first official dinosaur, Megalosaurus, even got a name. And it was almost 20 years before the scientist Richard Owen came up with the word dinosaur at all. They were working in the dark, truly.
So with no concept of dinosaur to go on, Gideon Mantell was kind of stuck. He had to look at animals alive today for any clues. And that search for a modern-day match led to a huge breakthrough. And finally, a name for this mystery creature.
And then came that aha moment. A museum curator takes one look and says, hey, those look just like iguana teeth, just way, way bigger. And that was it. Mantell had his match. He called his creature Iguanodon, which literally just means iguana tooth.
Okay, so a few years later, in 1834, they find a better skeleton. Still not the whole thing, mind you, but it was enough for scientists to try and piece this puzzle together for the first time. And what they imagined was this giant, heavy, lumbering reptile, basically an iguana on steroids.
And honestly, this is the perfect example of how science works, right? You've got limited evidence, so you make your best guess. They found this weird, pointy bone, thought of a rhinoceros, and just stuck it on its nose. Little did they know this would become maybe the most famous mistake in the history of dinosaurs.
So, for decades, that's what everyone thought Iguanodon looked like, this big lizard with a rhino horn. And that was the story, until a massive find in a Belgian coal mine blew everything out of the water.
I mean, this was the find of a lifetime. Starting in 1878, miners didn't just find one skeleton. They found 38 of them, all pretty much complete. This was a paleontological treasure chest, and it gave a scientist named Louis Dolo the chance to rethink everything.
So now, with all these complete skeletons laid out, Dolo could finally see the whole picture. And that so-called nose horn? Yeah, not a horn at all. It was a seriously wicked conical thumb spike. And that one single correction changed absolutely everything about how we saw this animal. All right, so with that huge classic mistake finally corrected, let's meet the real Iguanodon, the one we know today thanks to 2 centuries of scientific discovery. And it's wild just how different our picture is now. Mantell's first guess, based only on those teeth, was way off, almost double the real size. We now know Iguanodon was about as long as a city bus and weighed as much as an elephant. Still a huge animal, for sure, but a lot more dynamic than that first bulky beast.
So when you put it all together, what you get is this super successful and adaptable plant eater. It had this tough, toothless beak, perfect for ripping leaves off branches. It had that incredible thumb spike, great for fending off predators. And it was versatile. It could lumber around on all 4s or get up and run on its 2 back legs.
But you know, the story of Iguanodon goes way beyond just the science. Its crazy history of discovery and rediscovery has turned it into a real cultural icon. Think about it. For most people back in the day, these famous statues at London's Crystal Palace were the very first time they'd ever seen a dinosaur brought to life. And even though they were totally wrong, nose, horn, and everything, they basically burned the image of Iguanodon into everyone's minds for generations.
And that fame has really stuck around. I mean, it showed up in that classic BBC documentary, Walking with Dinosaurs, which definitely scared a lot of us as kids. And now you can find it in all these modern video games where you can raise one yourself, or even play as one.
And of course, we have to talk about its starring role in Disney's movie Dinosaur from the year 2000. For its time, the visuals were pretty amazing, but let's be real, most of us remember it for being, very brown. And maybe a little slow.
You know, when you look at the whole 200-year journey of the Iguanodon, from a couple weird teeth to that rhino lizard, and finally to the dynamic animal we know today, you're really looking at the story of science itself. It's a process of constant questioning, of making mistakes and correcting them. And that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it? What are the nose horns of our time? What scientific facts that we totally believe today will end up being the big, obvious mistakes of tomorrow?